I'm Jose-Luis Fernandez. I'm based at the London School of Economics, and I'm going to talk about one of the work packages of the Sprint project, which asks the question, to what extent can social investment principles drive decisions from government, specifically about government, because of course social investment is not purely about government as a decision maker, but to what extent can social investment principles help governments decide whether to invest in social care or not, long-term care, social care. We use social care as a term in England. And thank you very much. Let's just... so I don't want, Alan thought I was trying to put you off by having an equation there. It's only one equation, and actually the aim is to illustrate that implicit in the social investment approach, there is a very simple calculation, which is that, and actually I think this applies to any investment, is that if you want to understand whether you want to invest or not to invest, you then need to compare what it is that you're going to get out of the investment, the benefits, and that's the sigma B, the benefits, but also you want to compare those benefits against what you're having to invest, the cost of the investment. Yeah? So it's very simple. We want to look at net benefit of interventions, and we want therefore to compare the benefits against the costs. Can you please click another two? Yeah, and once more, and then keep it too far. Thank you. So I've highlighted just a couple of notions there which are important. One is it's net benefit, so it's therefore not benefit, is benefit relative to costs. That is a very important aspect, and we have to think about how this applies to long-term care. But also, I've highlighted the value of the benefits. And if we want to compare benefits against costs, we're going to have an idea of how to compare them, yeah? Because benefits might be expressed in units which are very difficult to compare against costs. And that's something that we need to think about when trying to apply social investment approach in the long-term care sector. And finally, I've highlighted those sigmas because, as Ismo was explaining a second ago, it's not just one benefit, it's many benefits. And so we have to think about, and that's the strength of the social investment approach, I think, in long-term care, when applied to long-term care, is that it forces you to think about the full breadth of consequences of benefits that might be derived from investments. And therefore, from a government perspective, that makes complete sense. Thank you very much. Let's just... it's not finished yet. He was smiling already. I was hoping not that quick. So obviously doing this is going to face us with some technical problems. Actually, Ismo has covered some of them, and I don't want to spend any time in explaining them, but just I will mention very quickly. One is that there are many different consequences we want to bear in mind. There's the impact on the well-being of users, carers, but also the consequences on employment, etc. So we need to, understand the full breadth of those consequences. And then we need to bring them up together. We need to aggregate them. We need to see what the overall value of those benefits is. That's not an easy thing to do. And then, of course, we need to in order to do that, we need to show some sort of preference between them. And those preferences might vary, for example, and are likely to vary very significantly between countries. Yeah? How much do we value carers versus users versus, all those things will vary between countries. Of course, we need to bear in mind that these investments might have long-term effects. Oh, sorry, yes, I should have... Can you hear me okay now? Yeah, sorry. And then finally, one that I think is very, very important because it means it has some very important implications in terms of the data that governments need to collect, which is whether we look at raw versus, or the importance of not looking at raw outcomes, but looking at the contribution of services. And I'm going to illustrate that with the next slide, which I won't talk in any detail because I would spend too much time. But this slide, is quite pretty, so I'll put it there. But the idea behind it is that quite often when you look at the consequences of social care and you focus on raw outcomes such as the quality of life, or, for example, how long you can keep people in the community, help them live independently in the community, which is what this slide relates to, those outcomes, those raw outcomes, are going to be poorest, lowest for the people with the greatest needs. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not for those people that services are actually having the greatest contribution, achieving the greatest productivity, in a sense. And there's a lot of evidence that suggests that actually you need to really pick up the contribution of services to outcomes, not outcomes in their raw form, or you will misunderstand the consequence, what the system is achieving. Okay, I'll just leave it there because I don't have time to go into further detail. So click another few times until those things disappear. There'll be another one. Carry on, carry on. There we go. And so, okay, so we do need, so let's imagine that those technical problems are not so important, and that we can therefore have some measure of the benefits and some measures of the costs of bringing a new intervention in the long-term care system. We might be able to measure those, and therefore different things might happen. Click once, please, Dimitris. It might be that actually that intervention is leading to higher costs, worse outcomes. Well, we want to reject that for sure. That's easy. One more. It might be that actually reduces costs, improve outcomes. That's easy. We want to do a lot of those things. That's the good news sort of quadrant. So that's, the figure is just illustrating the sort of scenarios. On the horizontal axis, you've got differences in benefits, on the horizontal, differences in costs. Or, and click once more, please, thank you very much. Or it might be that actually what you're getting is a trade-off between costs and benefits. So you might be improving benefits, but it's costing more. Now, that's a tricky thing to do, or to be faced. A situation where government then needs to decide, do I or do I not? Please click one more. One more. There we go. We're going to have to come up with some sort of willingness, measure of the willingness to pay, the societal willingness to pay for improvements in outcomes. Okay? And therefore, what we're saying is that in order to implement the social investment framework in terms of guiding decisions from government, you need that sort of idea about what government wants to pay. How much are we willing to pay for improvements in long-term care outcomes? Carry on. Just until you get rid of the slide, I don't have time to go into any further details. So we did look at, we did a review of evidence on the use of that approach internationally. No government has an indication of willingness to pay for long-term care outcomes. There isn't such a thing at the moment. In fact, there aren't agreed indicators of long-term care outcomes. There's some excellent work being developed. Partly I will say that because I need to declare an interest. I'm involved in a unit that is developing some of those indicators. But ASCOT is an excellent outcome indicator. ICECAP is an excellent outcome indicator. It is being recommended in certain places, but there's still no agreed outcome indicator for long-term care outcomes. And this is something that absolutely is required. But also, we then need to understand how much society is willing to pay for improvements in those indicators. And at the moment, we don't have an idea. We looked at related areas in the healthcare sector in particular. We did find, there's much more history of using this sort of approach. And there's in particular, how many of you do not know about the QALYs, so that I can skip the... Okay, everyone knows about QALYs. Excellent. Well, if you look at what the measures of social willingness to pay for QALY, you find that in England in particular, which is where this has been pushed, I think, to its extreme, there are indications which say that government decisions are based on a willingness to pay of £20,000 to £30,000 per QALY. That means that government will pay up to £20,000 to £30,000 per year in order to get a treatment that will improve somebody's well-being from zero, from death, to full health. Now, that's quite an achievement. I don't know many of those. So £30,000 in order to achieve a massive improvement in outcomes. Now, next slide, please. If you look at the care packages in social care, you will find that there are many which cost way more than £30,000 per year. Any residential care, well, any no, but most in England will cost more than that. So that's challenging, isn't it? So to what extent can we apply the same sort of thresholds in social care? Or to what extent do we need to go beyond cost effectiveness? I can't go into the details of that. Just let's go to the slide, which is, actually, there are other issues which are also important that we need to bear in mind. One is the special nature of the needs of people with long-term care needs. And indeed, when you look at, for example, what NICE, going back to the English example in healthcare allocation, certain users get special treatment. People who have got, for example, are very close to death, the willingness to pay per QALY can go up to 100,000, for example. yeah, or people who are for whom there's nothing else that can be done. They also get treated separately, differently. So, we need to consider the extent to which the needs of people with long-term care needs might warrant a slightly different willingness to pay. But there's also, and more importantly, I think, there's equity considerations. The establishment, for example, of social insurance models in Germany, in France, in Japan, although it's not a European country, were based on this idea of the risk, of social risk, the importance of, just protecting people against the lack of luck of developing long-term care need. And therefore, those considerations need to be reflected also in terms of judgments about what governments need to do in terms of funding. I'm getting the evil eye here on the right, so I'm going to just say a couple of things more. One is that obviously, there's a big movement towards empowering people, giving choice to people. Well, that means that people are going to decide what to do with the money that you might give them in order to cover their needs. And as a result, you might not end up with what is first assessed as a cost-effective solution for long-term care. So there are issues about the way in which the long-term care system is framed, which limit the applicability of this sort of approach, basically social investment approach to decision-making in terms of funding from the state. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jose-Luis.